So today we're jumping into a really interesting book by Guy P. Harrison called 50 Simple Questions for Every Christian. And right off the bat, the author makes it clear this isn't about attacking faith. Not at all. It's really about sparking curiosity and asking some fair and, he thinks, essential questions to get a more open conversation going about religion in today's world. The author kicks things off with a question that's, well, it's pretty simple, but it really makes you think. Why is it so often considered rude to ask tough, substantive questions about religion? I mean, we hear about faith all the time, right? From politicians to celebrities, it's everywhere. So why does questioning it sometimes feel so off limits? And that brings us to the book's first really big theme. The author argues that when we talk about religion in public, it often feels like a one-way street, where only certain ideas are allowed to have the right of way. And here's the kicker in his core argument. He says this isn't just a problem for skeptics, it's a loss for everybody, because when you shut down questions, you prevent any chance at a deeper understanding, and you kind of let misinformation just slide by without any challenge. To really drive this home, the book uses an example from politics. It points out how several politicians have said that God literally told them to run for office. And those claims, they got almost no serious pushback from the media. Now, just imagine for a second, if a candidate said, hey, aliens told me to run, can you even picture the media circus? The author suggests that wildly different reaction really highlights a clear double standard. So what's the bottom line here? The author argues that if a leader says their faith is a huge part of who they are, it's not just fair game to ask how that might shape their policies, it's actually crucial. We're not talking about abstract ideas here. We're talking about things with massive, tangible consequences for all of us. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. The author takes this idea of questioning and turns it inward, looking at the landscape of Christianity itself. And he asks a really fundamental question. Just how unified is this one faith, really? So how unified are we talking? Well, get ready for this number because it is pretty staggering. The book cites data estimating there are 41,000 distinct Christian denominations around the world. Yeah, 41,000. And the thing is, this isn't some new phenomenon. The author shows this kind of fragmentation has been part of the story from the very beginning. And you can really see it laid out here. I mean, from the earliest splits right after the death of Jesus, to the Great Schism in 1054, then Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation, and then even newer versions, like Mormonism, popping up in the 1800s. The author's point is pretty clear. Division has been a constant feature. So the question is why? Why so many different versions? Well, the author offers up a theory by comparing two different paths to truth. He argues that religion, which is based on personal revelation, is just naturally open to endless different interpretations. Science, on the other hand, is built on hard evidence that anyone can test and verify. And that, he says, is why you don't have 41,000 competing theories of evolution. This brings us to a really fascinating part of the book where it tackles a huge assumption that religion is absolutely essential for a good, moral society. The author decides, okay, let's not just assume that's true, let's actually test it against some data. And looking at data from 2012, he points out a pattern that's, well, it's pretty surprising. The 3 least religious states in America also happen to have the lowest rates of violent crime. Meanwhile, one of the most religious states, Louisiana, had the highest murder rate. Now, the author is super clear about this. It's a correlation, not causation. It doesn't prove one thing causes another. But it definitely challenges that simple assumption that more religion automatically means less crime. And this pattern isn't just in the US. The book mentions a study on global happiness that found some of the world's happiest countries, places like Denmark and Sweden, also have some of the highest rates of non-belief. And on the flip side, some of the least happy nations are often deeply, deeply religious. So, what's the big takeaway from all this data? For the author, the conclusion is pretty straightforward. He says that when you look at the evidence, it seems that human problems require human solutions. Maybe we're the ones we've been waiting for. Okay, so if we're the ones who have to solve our own problems, what's the best tool for the job? The author proposes one above all others: skepticism. And he's careful to define it not as some negative worldview, but as a practical, constructive, and incredibly useful life skill. Yeah, according to the book, skepticism is not about being a cynic or a downer. It's a positive tool that helps you see the world with clarity. It's about having the courage to ask, how do you know that's true, so you can navigate life without getting misled? The book even breaks it down into a simple method. First, the person making a claim is the one who has to prove it. Makes sense. Second, The weirder the claim gets, the stronger the evidence needs to be. You've probably heard the saying, extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. And finally, you have to be brave enough to follow that evidence wherever it might lead. To wrap everything up, the author presents his really powerful thought experiment. He asks us to imagine, if you were the creator, could you design a world and maybe a moral code that was a bit clearer and maybe even a little more compassionate? He starts by questioning the current design of our world. Why build a system where animals have to violently kill and eat each other just to survive? Why invent microscopic monsters like viruses and parasites? And why make the very planet we live on a source of constant, deadly chaos with things like earthquakes and floods? So, in place of traditional commandments, the author offers his own 10 recommendations. And you can see, they're a totally different vibe. These aren't rules enforced by fear or threats. They're suggestions built on things like curiosity, kindness, and independent thought. It's a very human-centered framework for how we could live a better life. And that leaves us with one final question, turning the author's whole project right back on us. The entire book is an exercise in asking questions. So it ends by challenging us to apply that exact same skill to our own lives. So, what's one thing you believe that you've just never really stopped to question?